Before you scroll, before you click away, let me ask you one simple question. What would you do if you boarded a private jet believing you were flying toward the opportunity of your life, only to realize, mid-air, that everyone else on the plane knew something you didn't? Tonight's story is not about turbulence. It's not about mechanical failure. And it's not about a mysterious crash in the ocean. It's about power, silence, and a private jet that became a flying crime scene long before its wheels ever left the runway. This case disappeared from headlines almost as quickly as it surfaced. The people involved were wealthy, connected, and protected by layers of legal walls. But one frightened passenger, one damaged voice recording, and one trail of erased flight data would expose something far darker than a routine charter flight. If you care about hidden crimes, forgotten victims, and the dangerous world that exists above the clouds, where money can rewrite reality, then stay with me until the end. Because by the time this jet finally lands, someone will be missing, and someone will never be able to tell their story again. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's begin. Maribel Knox never planned to fly private. She worked as a compliance analyst for a small aviation leasing firm in Lisbon, mostly buried in contracts and aircraft maintenance audits. Her job was boring, technical, and invisible, until a luxury charter company called Skyrain Aviation contacted her directly. They offered her a short consulting assignment. 3 days. High pay. Confidential review of internal documentation. The work required one condition. She had to be on board the aircraft during a repositioning flight to Reykjavik. Maribel found the request unusual but not illegal. Some charter companies preferred on-site compliance observers when preparing for regulatory inspections. Still, something about Skyrain's email felt rehearsed, overly polite, overly urgent. The aircraft was a custom-modified Gulfstream registered under a shell company named Northspire Holdings. When she researched the ownership trail, it dissolved into offshore entities in Malta, Panama, and Cyprus. Her supervisor told her to take the job. Good exposure, he said. Maribel packed light. Laptop, passport, noise-canceling headphones. She didn't know the jet had already been flagged twice by European airspace monitoring units. She didn't know 2 former crew members had signed non-disclosure agreements after abrupt terminations. And she didn't know she was the only person on board who hadn't been carefully selected. The jet waited on a private apron at Faro Airport, isolated from commercial traffic. Maribel noticed the passengers immediately. There were only 6. A tall man with a silver watch and no carry-on introduced himself as Leonard Voss. A quiet woman with mirrored sunglasses, calling herself Petra Hale. 2 men in tailored black jackets who never offered names. And a middle-aged couple who avoided eye contact entirely. The cabin felt curated. Expensive leather. Custom lighting. No airline branding. No visible safety cards. The flight attendant, a young man named Reuben Calder, spoke softly, like someone trained to disappear into the background. Maribel took the rear seat near the galley. As boarding finished, she realized something strange. No one used their phones. Not for photos. Not for messages. Not even for casual scrolling. They all sat still, waiting. When the engines powered up, she felt a faint vibration through the floor, normal, but the tension inside the cabin was not. Reuben offered champagne. No one accepted. Maribel glanced toward the cockpit. The door remained closed. She was used to flight decks, to greetings, to casual confirmation of passenger manifests. This time, there was none. And when the jet taxied forward, Leonard Voss whispered to the woman beside him, "Once we're airborne, nothing changes." Maribel connected her laptop to the cabin network. Skyrain's internal flight data portal was accessible to authorized devices. She was authorized. At least, her credentials worked. The flight plan displayed on her screen didn't match the briefing document she had received. The filed route avoided standard European corridors. It curved sharply west, dipping into an airspace buffer normally reserved for military and government flights. There was no operational reason for it. Fuel costs would be higher. Weather avoidance didn't justify the deviation. She refreshed the screen. The aircraft registration suddenly changed mid-session. Northspire Holdings vanished from the digital record. A new owner appeared. A foundation registered in Luxembourg called Aurelian Trust. She checked again. The timestamp showed the ownership update occurred 12 minutes earlier, the same time the jet pushed back from the gate. Maribel stood slowly. Reuben intercepted her before she reached the cockpit door. "Please remain seated, ma'am. I need to speak with the captain. I can relay your request." She lowered her voice. "The flight plan doesn't match regulatory filing." Reuben's smile didn't move his eyes. "The route is approved." "By whom?" A pause. Then, "Our client." When Maribel returned to her seat, she noticed something worse. Her access token had expired, and the network rejected her credentials. Someone on board had just revoked her permissions in real time. From the air. 30 minutes into flight, the cabin lights dimmed without announcement. Not for passenger comfort. For control. Maribel tried her phone. No signal. No satellite fallback. The aircraft's internal Wi-Fi remained active, but only for cabin systems. She stood again. This time, Leonard Voss blocked the aisle. "You're not supposed to move around now," he said quietly. "I'm a compliance officer," Maribel replied. "I need cockpit verification." Leonard leaned closer. "You were hired to observe documentation, not flight operations." Her stomach tightened. That distinction mattered. Reuben reappeared, his posture stiff. "Please return to your seat." "What's the captain's name?" Maribel asked. Neither of them answered. She turned toward the cockpit and called out. No response. Not even a muted intercom crackle. Maribel pressed the emergency call button beside the galley. Nothing happened. She placed her palm on the cockpit door. It wasn't just locked. It was electronically isolated. No manual override. That configuration was rare, used for transporting high-risk detainees or classified cargo. Not civilians. Not consultants. When she stepped back, she noticed the small red indicator light above the door. Recording active. Someone inside the cockpit was monitoring the cabin. But no one was speaking. The first mistake happened because Maribel refused to sit quietly. She opened her phone's audio recorder and slipped it into her jacket pocket. If the network was compromised, she would document what she could offline. She returned to her seat and leaned toward the middle-aged woman across the aisle. "Have you flown with Skyrain before?" The woman froze. Her eyes flicked toward Leonard. "No," she whispered. Maribel tried again. "What's your destination?" The woman swallowed. "We were told not to ask questions." Leonard's voice cut through the cabin. "That's enough." The atmosphere shifted. One of the unnamed men stood. He walked calmly to the galley and closed the sliding partition behind him. Reuben followed. Seconds later, a dull mechanical click echoed through the cabin. A secondary lock. Maribel suddenly realized the cabin had been segmented. Front section. Rear section. Only one path between them. And she was in the smaller half. Leonard turned toward her. "You weren't invited for oversight." Maribel's pulse thudded in her ears. "Then why am I here?" He studied her for a moment. "Because someone outside needed proof." Before she could respond, the aircraft jolted slightly. A controlled maneuver. Not turbulence. The kind of adjustment made to avoid detection. The smell came first. Metallic. Cold. Like disinfectant over rust. The man who disappeared into the galley returned pushing a narrow service cart. But it wasn't stocked with drinks. A reinforced case rested on top. Matte black. No airline markings. Leonard nodded. The man unlocked it. Inside was not money. Not documents. Not equipment. It was a biometric containment pod. The kind used to transport living human samples. Medical evacuation units. Portable. Heavily modified. The woman across the aisle gasped. Maribel stood up. That requires humanitarian clearance. Leonard closed the case calmly. It's already cleared. By which authority? By the same authority that changed your access credentials. Maribel felt something break inside her chest. You're trafficking someone. Leonard's smile returned. We're relocating an asset. The word hit harder than any threat. Asset. Not person. Not patient. Not witness. Maribel glanced at the biometric display. Vital signs were active. Weak. But present. Someone was alive inside that container. Someone sedated. And someone important enough to be hidden inside a private jet flying through protected airspace. The woman beside Maribel began to cry silently. Leonard turned back to her. You should be grateful. For what? You're only observing. Maribel pressed her hand inside her jacket. The recorder was still running. She needed names. She needed intent. She needed something that couldn't be erased remotely. What happens when we land? She asked. Leonard didn't hesitate. The transfer team will be waiting. And then, the asset disappears into clinical protection. Maribel shook her head. There's no such program. Leonard finally lost his patience. There is when governments don't want responsibility. One of the unnamed men leaned toward him. We're being monitored. Leonard nodded toward the cockpit. Of course we are. Maribel looked up sharply. By who? He exhaled slowly. Not by aviation authorities. The implication was clear. This flight wasn't rogue. It was sponsored. She forced herself to stay calm. What did this person do? For the first time, Leonard hesitated. They testified. The word hung in the air. Testified. Against whom? Maribel whispered. In what case? Leonard stood up. You've already recorded too much. He reached toward her jacket. Maribel reacted instinctively and stepped backward. Her foot struck the aisle lip. She fell. The recorder slid across the floor, and one of the unnamed men picked it up. The red light was still blinking. The aircraft suddenly banked left. Harder than before. Not dangerously. Deliberately. Ruben's voice came over the cabin intercom for the first time. Please remain seated. No reason given. Maribel watched Leonard glance at the ceiling panel. Someone in the cockpit was speaking to him. Through a private channel. The unnamed man crushed the recorder beneath his heel. Plastic cracked. Memory destroyed. Or so he thought. Maribel had synchronized her phone. The audio had already backed up locally. She felt a spark of fragile hope. Then the lights cut out. Emergency strips glowed along the floor. The partition door slid open. The front section of the cabin was now empty. The couple had vanished. The woman beside Maribel whispered. They moved them. Moved them where? The jet leveled out. Ruben emerged again. His voice was shaking. We'll be landing earlier than scheduled. Leonard turned sharply. That wasn't agreed. Ruben swallowed. Airspace Command changed our corridor. That sentence froze the cabin. Not flight control. Not ATC. Airspace command. Leonard's face hardened. Someone had noticed. Maribel realized the truth. This wasn't supposed to be a clean transfer. It was supposed to be invisible. But an outside monitoring system had flagged the deviation. And now the jet was being quietly rerouted. Without any official emergency. Someone was intervening. Without revealing themselves. The wheels touched down on a rain-slick runway in northern Scotland. Not Iceland. Not anywhere on Maribel's paperwork. The engines idled. No terminal. No hangar staff. Just darkness. And flashing vehicles approaching slowly. Unmarked. The cockpit door finally opened. 2 pilots stepped out. They refused eye contact. Leonard stood immediately. The biometric case was gone. So were the 2 unnamed men. So was the middle-aged couple. Maribel counted. 4 passengers missing. Reuben whispered to her as he passed. They transferred mid-flight. "Where?" she asked. He shook his head. "There's a compartment beneath the cabin." A conversion bay. Illegal on civilian charters. Maribel felt cold all over. The aircraft door opened. Not to police. To a small group of men in neutral uniforms with no visible insignia. One approached Leonard. A brief exchange. No raised voices. No confrontation. The man turned toward Maribel. "You are not authorized to disembark yet." She raised her phone. "I recorded everything." He looked genuinely unsurprised. "We know." The words were gentle. Almost kind. "You'll be escorted separately." "What about the person in the pod?" A pause. Then, "They will not be accessible again." Maribel realized the most terrifying part. Not that a crime had happened, but that everyone here agreed on how it would end. Maribel was released 12 hours later. No charges. No paperwork. No statement taken. Only a document placed in front of her. A civil liability acknowledgement. It didn't ask for her silence. It assumed it. Her employer terminated her contract the next morning. Restructuring, they said. Skyrain Aviation ceased operations 2 weeks later. The website vanished. The aircraft registration was reassigned. Northspire Holdings never existed. Aurelian Trust dissolved quietly. Maribel submitted her audio backup to an international investigative outlet. They replied once. Then never again. 3 months later, she received an anonymous message. 1 sentence. They were never meant to survive testimony. She tried to trace it. It led nowhere. Public aviation databases showed no irregularities on the flight. No diversions. No unscheduled landings. No passenger manifest. The jet's flight history had been rewritten. Perfectly. Maribel still wakes up to the sound of soft mechanical clicks. Locks engaging. Partitions closing. She knows now what the job really was. Not compliance. Not oversight. She was there to validate something. To make sure an independent observer witnessed a transfer. So that, somewhere, someone could say, the asset was delivered. And the witness was present. If this story unsettled you, it should. Because private aviation operates in a world most of us will never see. A space where accountability becomes optional, where ownership disappears behind foundations and shell companies, and where the word passenger can quietly become asset. Maribel Knox never signed up to be part of an international relocation operation. She signed up to review documents. And yet, she became the only person on that jet who wasn't protected by money, influence, or classified authority. Somewhere out there, the person inside that containment pod had a name, a life, and a story that mattered enough to frighten powerful people. And we may never know what they were prepared to testify about. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, if you believe forgotten victims deserve a voice, then support this channel. Like the video, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes crimes only happen in dark alleys and broken neighborhoods. Because sometimes they happen at 40,000 feet, on leather seats, behind